Hi everyone, welcome back to So Arizona. Today I am talking about all of the lessons that my garden has taught me this season and a couple of from the past seasons. Now I don't want to call them mistakes because I like to think of it in a positive light. We are always learning about seasonal differences, differences in pests and temperatures and all kinds of weather related things that happen in the garden from year to year that are outside of our control. But then there are other techniques that just work really well in our particular little microclimate of a garden that may work best for us but not for somebody else. And so one thing that I love about gardening is that it makes you a forever student. I want to start with the garlic bed. The garlic bed was a huge success last year, and I've had my fair share of struggles with growing garlic in the past, but last year I feel like I finally cracked the code on it. I ended up with 46 pounds of garlic, which is so much more garlic than we can ever use. I've actually had the opportunity to share it with other people, which I think is one of the joys of gardening, and that is sharing your harvest with other people. But I want to talk about one of the things that I have changed this year because of what I learned last year. And it's actually not directly related to the garlic. It's actually related to my irrigation system. So we just have a basic pieced together irrigation system that we got at Home Depot. We have some irrigation lines and some drip tubing, and we've got a couple of rainbird timers that we put together ourselves. Eventually, we're going to have to go ahead and pay a professional to do irrigation in this garden because it is so much to expect of this little system. It's a quarter of an acre, and that is a lot of ground to cover, literally, for this irrigation system. But for now, it's doing okay. It gets the job done, but we do have to have frequent repairs on it and just keep an eye on it because it is sometimes prone to disaster. That's okay though. That is part of being patient in the garden. That is the fact that you don't have all the money that you need to do all the projects that you want to do right at the beginning. So I have to be patient and pace myself, and eventually I will get that shiny irrigation system installed that I am dreaming about. But for now, it is influencing my decisions on how I plant. So in this garlic bed, I have irrigation lines running. And last year I planted in between the irrigation lines and against the irrigation lines, just all the way down in straight rows. But I found that the garlic that I planted in between the irrigation lines did not get enough moisture. And because of that, I ended up with bulbs that were smaller and cloves that were smaller on those. I could have gone with the option of putting in more irrigation lines. I thought about doing that, just adding one, so that I could double the irrigation lines in this bed. But I realized that because I have so much space on these two little irrigation systems, there's not going to be enough pressure, water pressure, to get from point A to B and have the end of the line get watered as much as the beginning of the line if I'm adding more lines. I think at this point, it's completely tapped out, and I really shouldn't be adding anymore, because if I do, that means further down the line on the back of the garden, it's not going to get enough water. So instead of adding more irrigation line, I'm decreasing the amount of garlic I'm planting in these beds. So ideally, you want to have 6 inches between your garlic cloves when you plant them. So what I did is I planted them all the way down along either side of the irrigation line. So if the irrigation line is in the center, I planted 2 rows, one on either side. And that way they are both getting access to the water, but they also have that 18-inch path in between where I didn't plant any garlic this year, where their roots are free to, expand and do what they need to do, so that hopefully they have enough space that way, even though I'm growing in a double row. So that is the first thing that I would change. The next thing is not something that I can change, but I want to pass it along to you just in case you're installing in-ground beds and it might not have been something you thought of already. Now we are in front of my 4x4 in-ground beds. So I have a couple different styles of bed. I've got that big triangle bed that you just saw with the garlic, and I've got some 30 to 32 foot long beds on this other side. But here I have my 4x4 square foot beds. And I love these, but there is one thing I would change. When I installed the path, you can see that right here, I made it 12 inches apart. And what I was thinking at the time is that I wanted maximum garden bed space, and I didn't want to waste a lot of space with the paths. And what I was thinking about was, do I have enough space to be able to walk through? And of course I do, but that's about all I have space for. I don't have space for driving wheelbarrows through here, which is probably 2.5 feet. The wheelbase of my wheelbarrow is about 2.5 feet. And it is really hard to get in and work in one bed without getting my feet into the other bed. It's hard to shovel, compost. I can't bring the wheelbarrow in with wood chips or compost and just dump because I can't get the wheelbarrow through. The wheelbase is much too wide. So if I were to do this again, I would actually make these paths 2.5 feet wide at minimum. Even though it feels like I'm wasting space, I'm actually creating enough space to be able to get in and do the work that I need to make the garden productive. So if you are planting your garden or you're building raised beds or whatever, if you're having to think about paths, make sure you're looking at your wheelbarrow because you'll probably need one, and make sure that you're able to fit that through there easily and that you can move around with a shovel and you can dump compost and all of those things that you'll need to do going forward. The next thing I'm changing is another pattern. Actually, I'm seeing a pattern in the patterns, and that is how I'm going to be planting these square foot beds this year. So I have always been a big fan of polyculture, and that is blending what you're planting. So you plant herbs and flowers and vegetables all together in the same bed. And I still love that concept, and I'm still practicing that concept in most other parts of the garden. But I found in this bed it was a little harder to manage because of water requirements and space requirements and just being able to get in and weed. It was just a little bit harder to manage it because they were smaller in space. The plants got big. It was a little bit harder to see. So this summer I tried something a little differently. You can see this bed right here is completely full of eggplants, and I planted only eggplants in this bed because I wanted to see how it would do. Would they get more pests if I had all of the same kind of plant together? Would the beneficial insects still come? How would I like working with just a single crop in a single space? I actually had great results in all of those things. I had plenty of pollinators. I did not have an increase in pests. I liked being able to come over here and say, oh, here are my eggplants. I'm going to harvest all of my eggplants now. So it was a lot easier for me to manage and to stay organized with things. And honestly, since I was just talking about how there are only 12 inches between each one of these beds, it is not a far distance for an insect to fly from one bed to the next. So I really didn't think that there was a decrease in the benefits of planting more of a polyculture in each bed. So technically, I've got a polyculture in all of these beds. And so I've got peppers on this side, I have eggplants on this side, I've got tomatoes over here, and flowers in between. So these beds are so close together anyway that I really don't think there is a benefit to planting a ton of different things in each bed. So I've got a ton of different things planted in this entire space, but I am simplifying my bed design this year so that I have only one thing in each of these beds. So moving forward into fall, I'm going to be planting the same kind of crop in each of these beds. So I've got one that's got collard greens, and one that has cabbages, and one that has kale, and so on. And I'm going to see how I like that. And I really actually think that I'm going to like it pretty well because I will know exactly where I need to go to harvest things. As I'm going through in the morning on my morning walk and I'm checking on the garden, I will be able to tell very quickly what needs to be addressed in each bed because I will be looking at a single plant. So that is my plan with what I'm going to change moving forward this year. I have a big garden and there are a lot of moving parts, and I also really like to travel and do other things. So I am learning how to simplify to make my life a little easier and to still have a productive garden. The next thing are plant labels. And I've learned a lot about plant labels over my gardening career. I have used pretty much every kind of label that you can imagine. I've used plastic ones that I've made out of sour cream and yogurt containers when I was so broke I couldn't even afford plant labels, and those worked okay. And I've purchased plastic ones and those worked okay. And then I decided I wanted to try to move away from plastic because as they wear down, they leave microplastics in the soil, and I didn't want to have that in my soil. So I was trying to find other alternatives. So I started with wood, and so I've got a couple different examples here. One is very used, an old one. This was about 12 inches long, and this is a biodegradable, kind of a compressed wood product from Botanical Interest. The marker that I used on it was a plant marker, and that stayed. It did not fade, which I have had trouble with plastic markers, is that you write on it with the little black plant marker or the permanent marker, and then as you water and as the sun shines on it, it fades. But with these wooden ones, I have not had that trouble. So I really like that. The other thing that I like about this one is that it was really tall. So this was actually originally about 12 inches long, but since it's biodegradable and it's been in my soil, it's actually degraded, as it should, and it's much shorter now. But what I liked about it is that it was tall, so it stuck up above some of the plants and it was easier for me to see. I think there are quite a few companies that make plant labels like this, and so I would recommend this if you're looking for a tall wooden label. The next wooden label was actually a big disappointment. I tried it for the first time last year. I think I'd actually recommended you all try it on one of my videos about a year or so ago, and it was a bamboo wooden label. And this is what the old one looks like. It is coming apart. This is 2 layers now. The marker that I used for it was specifically designed for these plant labels. They were supposed to stay intact through water and sun. They did not. They faded. It is bendy. It actually broke just now. It has delaminated, and so it didn't even last an entire season. I expected that it would break down throughout the season, but I didn't think it was going to happen so quickly. So I ended up with quite a few beds that had these in them, and I wasn't really sure what variety of pepper I was looking at or what variety of tomato, so it was kind of annoying. But the ones that I like the best are these metal labels. So this one is kind of a copper metal label, and this one is just a black metal that's painted. And I like both of these. This one has a special little kind of felt tip metallic type of marker that you can use for it, and on this one I've just used a permanent marker. What I like about these is that they're tall, so if you're growing bushy plants, it's going to be really easy to see these. What I also really like about them is that they don't break down, so I can use them year after year. And it's really easy to do that by just taking a cotton swab and some rubbing alcohol. You can just clean whatever writing you have on these off, and they look brand new and ready to use next year. In fact, these labels were used in my garden for the last year, and they have not faded at all. So I really like these. The one drawback of them is that they're more expensive to purchase in the beginning, but they definitely make up for that when you're using them year after year. Now, I understand if you don't have the budget in the beginning to purchase these, you just don't have the budget for it. And so you can just use one of these other options, and they'll work, but they do have a few things about them that are a little bit annoying. So moving forward this year, I'm going to try to invest more in some of these metal reusable plant labels. That way I don't have to keep rebuying in the future. So I'm going to use up the rest of these wooden ones in spaces where I can keep better track of things and they're not going to get lost, or I'm not going to get confused about what varieties I have planted, but I'm moving towards these for sure. I ordered them online. There are quite a few companies that make these. I think this copper one I got from Gardener's Supply, and honestly I can't remember where I got this one. So you'll just have to look for metal labels or metal reusable labels or something like that. But that is another thing that I am moving to change this year. Here I am again next to this last remaining patch of Bermuda grass, and it was actually really funny because over the weekend, last weekend, when I was working so hard to clear some of this Bermuda grass out of this bed so that I could prep it for my fall planting, I stumbled upon a discovery, and that is some long forgotten potatoes. Now, you may be wondering how in the world I could have planted an entire row of potatoes and forgotten about them, but it's actually possible because that is exactly what I did. I had planted these potatoes, I had cared for them, through the frost. I'd provided a frost cover, and they weren't quite finished yet, and so I was trying to get a head start of my tomatoes, so I put my tomato seedlings in. And as it started to warm up, those potato vines started to die back a little bit, as they should, but my tomatoes got bushier and bushier, and then we had an incredibly busy and distracting spring and summer. I had surgery, which I had a really difficult recovery from. I lost my mother, so I was back and forth in Ohio trying to make arrangements for her, and it was just a really distracting summer. So by the time I circled back around, after my garden had been on autopilot for quite a few weeks, the tomatoes were huge, and the potatoes had completely gone away. Their vines had died back, and after all of that distraction, I forgot they even existed. So I went on about my business this summer. They were apparently chilling out in the soil underneath my tomatoes, and they started actually growing back as the weather has cooled down just a bit. So as I was weeding through here and trying to remove some of this Bermuda grass, I was like, what is that plant? What is that? And then I realized it was all of my potatoes. So apparently what they did is they just hung out under the soil, and now they have resprouted again. So they never got harvested, and now they are going for round 2. So this is actually going to be an interesting experiment to see what they do and what kind of a harvest I get. If I've got a 20-pound potato under there, or if they're just a lot of little ones, who knows? So that is something I will have to let you know about later on. But I just thought it was really funny. So I'm actually kind of laughing at myself. I'm not really serious about learning a lesson here per se, other than maybe putting it on my calendar to dig the potatoes up so that I remember that they exist, which brings me to record keeping. It is so important to keep records of the varieties you plant and when you planted them and how they performed, and that is something that I do. I have a little garden journal that I jot down things with, because you would be surprised from year to year. You think that you'll remember, oh, this variety did this, or it performed this way, or I want to try it again, or I definitely don't want to grow it again. But you actually forget, at least I do. I've got a lot of different varieties out here, and my brain is not as good at keeping track of all of those details as I wish it were. So I definitely need to write things down. So I guess that's the lesson, is keep better records and put it on the calendar to dig the potatoes, or to dig the carrots, or to dig whatever, because if those things are underground and their tops die back, then you may not remember that they even exist either. Believe it or not, we are almost finished with all of the lessons that I have learned, and I really hope that these are helping you too, giving you some ideas, or maybe preventing you from making a few of the same missteps that I have, like those narrow paths in my garden. But the next thing I want to talk about has to do with this pumpkin. So this pumpkin is a variety that I tried this year, and I really don't like it. I have made a couple of different things from this, some pumpkin soup and some other things, and I find that it has a really washed out, really just lackluster flavor, and I just don't like it, and I probably will not be growing this again the next year. The lesson though of this pumpkin is that I had so many different things planted in the beds, I was running out of space, and I decided that I was going to plant more of the new thing than I was some of my tried and true things, to try to save space. So I ended up planting, I think, 2 or 3 of these pumpkin vines for this new variety, and I only planted one of my absolute favorite, which is the Magdalena Big Cheese. And my Magdalena Big Cheese pumpkin just didn't do very well, which is also another lesson. You want to have redundancy, and just in case, because you never know when you're going to have a pest, or something just doesn't perform well. Genetics are weird. Maybe the plant was just not healthy from the get-go. Who knows? It could be all kinds of things. But I should have planted a trial of this one and planted more of my favorite because I know I was going to like those. I know they've done well in my garden in the past. And if I had had backup, I probably would be eating some of my favorite pumpkins right now instead of these that are actually pretty mediocre at best. So that is the lesson. If you're going to be growing something new, just opt for less of it and more of your tried and true favorites. That way you always have something that you like. But it is a pumpkin and it's cute, so I'm not going to hold it against it. This is going to go on my fireplace and it's going to go with my other pumpkins in a cute little display, and it's just not going to be eaten. I'll probably put it in the compost, or maybe I will leave it out as a gift to those stinky javelinas who seem to always be wanting to eat all of my other plants. Maybe it'll be a peace offering and they'll go away. I've talked a lot about using a living mulch or a low-growing plant that you can plant on the understory or on the soil surface underneath your taller growing plants as a living mulch or a green mulch. And last year I planted some white clover in some of my beds, 2 of my beds actually, and I was hoping that it would amend the soil because clover is a nitrogen fixing plant. I was hoping that it would add organic matter to the soil and that it would add some structure to the soil too. And it did all of those things. However, I am not growing white clover again in my garden as a green mulch. And that is because of my climate, not because of the plant. The plant was perfect. It was too perfect actually. So since I live in a really warm area and we have very mild winters, it didn't get frost killed. And so it allowed those roots to get more and more established. In the spring when I went to go plant those beds, I had to work really hard to get that clover out because it was getting big and it was getting bushy and it was just taking over the entire space. And it was probably every bit as hard to dig that out as it was the Bermuda grass. It had formed a very thick mat of roots, and so I would definitely not recommend it if you are living and growing in a warm area where the clover isn't going to get frost killed. Now, if you're okay with mowing that down almost like a lawn periodically throughout the season and then planting through it, you know, like digging a hole through it, that might work if you're starting with a bigger transplant, but I start from seed a lot of the time and it just did not work very well for me. It's great for the soil, it's great for the pollinators. The blooms attracted a lot of the pollinators, but it was just too invasive. So I am moving away from that. I also moved away a couple years ago from using straw, and straw is the stalk or the stem that's left over from cereal crops. After they come through and they harvest it, then they have the bottom portion of the plant and they can cut that and use it as straw for bedding or for gardening and things like that. And I had to move away from that because it was just really contaminated with seed from the crop that it was from. And that is actually a perfectly natural thing. But when you put it in your garden, you don't necessarily want to have little sprouts of wheat or oats or barley or what have you growing in the garden, because that actually creates more work, because instead of having the mulch hold down the weed pressure, it actually increases it and creates more work for me to have to deal with. So I don't use that. I used to be a big fan of using alfalfa because they generally cut it before it blooms, so you don't have the problems with seeds being in the alfalfa hay. So that's really nice. It's also a legume, and so it has a lot of great nitrogen and other things. There's a hormone in it called triacantanol that is really great for plant growth, but they also use paraquat on it. That is a chemical when they're growing it, and that is not something that I want to be exposed to myself as I'm working with it, and it's not something that I want to have in my garden beds. And so I decided to move away from that too, because it's kind of hard to find an organic source for alfalfa, at least where I am. Now, if you want to try alfalfa for all of its benefits, and there are many, and you have a source for some organic alfalfa, then I would highly recommend that for mulch in your garden beds. But if you don't have an organic source, you might want to keep looking, which is what I'm doing. In the meantime, as I'm clearing out my garden beds from season to season. I stack up the debris, and when it's a little dry, I will put it through my shredder, and I've been using that as a garden mulch in my beds, and that seems to work really, really well. But I am still looking either for something that I can grow as a living mulch or just some other product that I can use on top of my beds, because I do have a lot of garden debris because my garden is so big, but I don't have quite enough to top all of my beds with mulch. So I am still on the lookout. So to end on a positive note, the last lesson that this season has taught me is to take advantage of the opportunities that you get and to not be so responsible. And that might seem a little crazy to say, because our children and our partners and our families and our communities and our coworkers all depend on us to be responsible and to, have characteristics that they can count on. And all of those things are very important. And so I'm not trying to negate that. But what I am saying is that sometimes it is really easy to lose sight of living life and spending time with the people you love and having adventures and exploring, or just taking advantage of little opportunities. They don't have to be grandiose, because we have laundry to do, or we really should go grocery shopping, or maybe our house needs to be cleaned. I've certainly been guilty of that. Some of my regrets when my children were young is that I spent so much time doing all of the work and the responsible things and not enough time playing. And so that is something that I have really tried to do as I've gotten older and I've had a little bit more freedom apart from that responsibility. So I know that I could never have done even a fraction of what I do now, because I had responsibilities that I absolutely had to take care of. But I also know that there were moments on the weekend, or maybe on a morning or an evening, where I could have taken just a little bit of time just to focus on doing something that brought me joy, just a little bit more. And so this season, where I was recovering from surgery, where I was having to deal with my mother's things, was followed by some opportunities to do some pretty cool travel. And I could have stayed home because I was certainly behind in the garden. The Bermuda grass had taken over, which I have shared about quite a bit, and I did not get as much productivity with the rest of my garden as I would have liked to. And if I would have stayed home, I could have gotten all of that done, and my garden could have been neat and tidy, and I could have had perfect productivity and felt like a great success. But I would have missed out on some of those other opportunities. And you know what? My garden was still here waiting for me when I got back, and I have slowly gotten the Bermuda grass under control, and I have still gotten enough vegetables out of the garden to make it worthwhile. And even though it wasn't perfectly productive, it was perfect enough. And I still got to make some really cool memories and doing some really cool things, which is exactly what I needed after such a hard spring and summer. I think the biggest piece of advice I have for myself and encouragement for you is to take those opportunities when they come, as you can, as your responsibility and your life permits you to. Steal away for a few minutes and do a few little things here and there that bring you joy. They may be bigger, they may be smaller, depending on your place in life, and I certainly understand that and have been there too. But I also know that the weeds and the chores and all of that are going to be there when you get back, and you'll be much more refreshed to handle them when you've taken a little time for yourself. Those are the lessons that I have learned for myself this year, and I hope that some of those will help you too. I'm Kara from So Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gardening.